Bitcoin has just set a new all-time high, and that has led to a huge influx in mainstream media coverage and social media coverage as well. So we're seeing headlines like this, which is going to lead to a number of new participants in the market, a number of potential new investors that are trying to decide whether Bitcoin is still worth buying in 2024. So that's the question I want to help you answer in this video. I'm not going to tell you to buy Bitcoin. I'm not going to tell you to avoid Bitcoin. What I'm going to try and do is give you some pieces of information that will help you make the right decision for you. Because ultimately, the answer to the question of should you buy Bitcoin in 2024 is different for everybody. Now, before I get into the video, I just want to say, stay away from the comments section. As this is a Bitcoin and cryptocurrency related video, you're going to see a complete mess down there. You're going to have people impersonating me, trying to scam you. You're going to have scam bots down there as well. You can have people that have already decided they hate Bitcoin telling you it's a Ponzi scheme. You're going to have people, the Bitcoin maxis that love Bitcoin, telling you it's the future of finance. And you can have lots of other people down there shilling their meme coins and crap coins, trying to get you to buy into the schemes that they've bought into as well. So just avoid the comment section completely, as it's just a complete mess. And YouTube, you need to do better. So on to Bitcoin. As you can see on this chart, and if you're not familiar with how to use charts like this, all you need to know very loosely is green is up and red is down, unless someone has changed the colors, of course. And you can see we are, at the moment, we're just below all-time high. Over the past week or two, we did set a new all-time high compared to the one that was set in 2021. So like I said, this has led to a massive influx of social media coverage and also mainstream media coverage. And inevitably, as happened in 2021, you get lots of new people entering the market, making poor decisions. So hopefully I'm going to help you with that in this video. And by the end of the video, you'll be able to make the right decision for you. So firstly, we have to establish very, very quickly, because I don't want this to be a boring video, what Bitcoin is, but also what Bitcoin isn't. So I've used ChatGPT for this to keep this as succinct as possible. Bitcoin is a decentralized digital currency that operates on a peer-to-peer network, enabling secure and transparent transactions without the need for intermediaries like banks. This is why banks and the government really don't like things like Bitcoin, as it takes them out of the equation. It relies on blockchain technology for its decentralized nature and limited supply, with transactions recorded on a public ledger. Now, just to explain that in a bit more detail, is if you're going to be investing in a coin, you might as well understand at least the basics of how it works. So the public ledger basically means that all transactions on Bitcoin are publicly available, which is great. Now, that's not to say that Bitcoin can't still be anonymous, but the public ledger tracks everything that happens. So if you do something dodgy with it and they find out the wallet's associated with that dodginess, they can track everything else you've done. So it's anonymous to an extent, but it's fully trackable. The other part there is about the blockchain technology. And if you think about Bitcoin, every time a number of transactions take place, there are bricks in a wall being laid. And every time you lay a new row, that row below becomes immutable. It can't be changed. And that's why it's held on that public ledger. And you've probably heard about Bitcoin miners. So these guys compete to solve a mathematical equation using very expensive and energy intensive hardware. And if they're lucky enough to solve that equation, they get to basically create or write the next block of the blockchain, and then they are rewarded in Bitcoins. They are paid Bitcoins for doing that. And that's important to keep in mind, as I'm going to refer back to that later on in the video. So we know very briefly what Bitcoin is. I think it's also important to note what it's not. So you're going to see a lot of people telling you it's the future of finance, but in its current state, with the speed of Bitcoin and the transaction fees of Bitcoin, it is not a replacement for traditional currency. It's not going to replace the US dollar. It's not going to replace the British pound. Now, I'm not saying it's not going to have an impact on them and people aren't going to transact on that chain, but it's not going to be the case, or it's very unlikely it's ever going to be the case. You're going to walk into a shop and you're going to pay in Bitcoin because the network just doesn't support now. There are some layer 2 solutions that have tried to do that in the past, but I really don't see that ever being adopted fully. So what I think you need to see Bitcoin as, which I think is the example that I agree with the most, is it is a version of digital gold, although people will argue it has no intrinsic value, whereas gold, obviously you have the lump of gold, whereas I say Bitcoin doesn't have intrinsic value. But Bitcoin it's just an investment vehicle. It is for speculation. And you can argue one way or another, but ultimately, whether someone is a Bitcoin maxi and believes fully in the technology, 99% of people that buy Bitcoin buy it for one reason, because they believe the price is going to go up or go down if they're shorting the market. That is why people are buying Bitcoin. Don't let anyone else convince you otherwise. People are buying Bitcoin because they want to make money. And that's as simple as that. So now we've established that. Is Bitcoin worth buying still in 2024? Well, like I said earlier on in the video, I'm not going to tell you either way whether to buy or not, but I'm going to give you a couple of pieces of information that may impact your decisions, your timing, and whether you're actually going to buy it or not. So the first thing you need to keep in mind is, where are we in the cycle? Well, as we know, we are around about new all-time highs. So is this a good time to buy? I can't tell you whether this is a good time to buy, because for all I know, Bitcoin could go to £100,000 in the next couple of months, or it may come down £10,000, £20,000. Who knows? No one out there knows exactly what Bitcoin is going to do. But what is clear is that when you're at these areas here, after a big pump up like we've seen over the past few months, think about it logically. Everyone below this current price point bought Bitcoin at a cheaper price than you if you buy now. So when you consider the risk reward at the moment, there are a lot more people who can make money selling their Bitcoin if you buy now. So people have bought Bitcoin at $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, and they can sell to you for a profit. You're their exit liquidity. So for me, I personally am not buying Bitcoin at this price point, because I can see how much of the market is below my entry point. I would prefer to be buying it at a point where there's at least a few people above me. Now, as to what is a good entry point, I'm not going to comment on that. That is something you're going to have to establish yourself. But for me, when I look at the overall cycle and where we are, yes, I do believe that we will be going higher over the next year to 18 months. I also think there's a high probability that we get large corrections as we do that, as you can see with these big red candles in previous bull markets. So you always have to keep that in mind. When or where in the cycle are you buying? It's unlikely you're ever going to time the bottom perfectly or the top perfectly. The key is to get in and get out on the way up. And you're going to leave a bit on the table. You'd rather do that than round trip it, which is what a lot of people do. They'll ride it to the top and they'll ride it back down. So there'll be lots of people at the moment saying my Bitcoin is worth $67,000. But actually, it's not, because if all those people sold at the same time, it wouldn't be worth $67,000. So there are a number of people out there who could sell at that price point. If everyone sold, then this is going to come down very quickly. So not everyone that thinks they've got £70,000 or $70,000 Bitcoin can actually sell at $70,000 at the moment, because the price would come down as that happened. For all of that said, Bitcoin does have a couple of things going for it that, for me, make it different to other cryptocurrencies. The biggest, which you've probably heard of, and that was the ETF approvals. Now, the ETF approval happened at the start of this year, January the 10th, 2024, and basically this applies to America. So what the ETFs do, they allow people in America to invest in Bitcoin at its current price. So they're called spot ETFs. So you can invest in Bitcoin at its current price without having to actually own the asset. So you invest in the ETF fund and not buy the asset itself, if that makes sense. So a number of these ETFs were approved in January, and there's been large inflows into these ETFs over the past couple of months. So we're seeing institutional buying of Bitcoin, whereas you could potentially argue that in previous cycles, these would have been driven a bit more by retail money coming into the market. So people like you and me, whereas these big green candles here were probably more likely the ETFs and inflows going into these ETFs. And you can see since we've been approved, there's been a lot of money flowing into these ETFs. Now, one thing to keep in mind with these ETFs is the ETFs themselves don't necessarily have to be pro or against Bitcoin. They charge fees for managing it. So as long as they can get people to sign up and buy Bitcoin via them, that's how they're going to make their money. So to them, they don't really care if Bitcoin goes up or down too much. So don't make that confusion that ETFs are, super bullish about Bitcoin. It just means that they're happy they can make money, trading Bitcoin on behalf of the people that want to invest into their funds. But what it does suggest with all of these ETFs that have been approved is that we potentially are going to see inflows of money into Bitcoin like we haven't seen in the past, which could produce continued upward pressure And if you speak to most people in the crypto sector, I think a lot of people have been caught out by how fast this has gone over the past few months. Now, like I said earlier, I am expecting there to at least be some sort of cooling off period at some point in the near future. But then I've been saying that since about $35,000, $40,000, and I've been wrong every time. So again, that goes back to my earlier point of never trust anyone that tells you where Bitcoin's going to go, because ultimately we just don't know. But certainly I think there is the opportunity for this to have a bit of a pullback, which would provide a better entry point if you decide for yourself that buying Bitcoin is a good decision. The other thing to keep in mind is there is something called the halvening happening in 34 days. So towards the start of this video, I mentioned that Bitcoin miners get rewarded in Bitcoin for solving the mathematical equation that allows them to write the next block in the chain. So that reward is basically halving in 34 days time. So what that means is the people doing the mining are going to want their Bitcoin to be worth more money if they're going to continue securing and validating the network. So the halving in the past, there's plenty of videos on this from other channels. The halving in the past has generally been bullish for Bitcoin, and the price action after the halving has generally been positive. And that's one thing that's caught a lot of people out this time, is a lot of people were expecting this after the halving, not before. So a lot of people have been surprised to see a new all-time high before this halving took place. Well, that's going to take place in 34 days, which means there is, with that and the ETF together, you could argue that on the balance of probabilities that Bitcoin is likely to see positive price action throughout the rest of the year, but there will certainly be blips on the way. But ultimately, no one knows exactly where it's going to go. We might see some sort of event happen in the next few days, and this could come straight back down. And that's another thing you need to keep in mind if you're considering investing in Bitcoin. It is extremely volatile. You can see movements in a day of $10,000, $20,000, which is huge amount. So you need to have a good risk appetite and be able to manage that volatility mentally. If not, just stay well away from this market. The other thing as well, there is no, especially in the UK, there is no 100% safe way to buy Bitcoin. You can buy a Bitcoin on an exchange, and as we saw in when FTX went bust, that people that had cryptocurrency on their exchange did lose it. Some of them might be getting it back, we're not sure. So there's no bulletproof way of buying Bitcoin, because it's not like putting money into a savings account. If you've got an FSCS protected savings account and the bank goes bust, the government will give you that money back. Whereas Bitcoin, if you lose your Bitcoin, if you get hacked somehow, or if the exchange you've got your Bitcoin hosted on goes bust, then potentially that money's gone and you've got no comeback, you've got no recourse. So if you are going to invest in Bitcoin, one, don't invest an amount of money in it that you can't afford to lose. You should only ever invest money in Bitcoin or any crypto that you can 100% afford to lose. And I've got to be honest, in the last bull market, because I basically round tripped it, I held my bags too long, I lost over 5 figures last bull market. So that's why I'm trying to get this video out now, as I want to prevent people making that mistake. Bitcoin is extremely volatile. You could lose all your money. And if you're going to invest some money, don't invest a large percentage of your overall money. If you've got maybe 100 grand, don't go and stick 80 grand in Bitcoin. Maybe go and stick 5 grand or 3 grand, a small percentage, so that these volatile moments won't impact you mentally. And if things do go completely wrong and you lose all that money, it doesn't impact you either. So that's my current take on Bitcoin. Hopefully that will help you make your own decision as to whether Bitcoin is a good investment for you or not in 2024. Now, as the comments section are a complete mess, I don't want you to head down to the comments. Instead, if you found this video helpful, please hit the like button. And if you want to see more from me, subscribe to the channel.